Right. I think in order to get a good grasp of what the circular economy is, first you have to understand what it isn't. So we are currently living in the linear economy, where we extract resources out of the ground, then we produce something, consume the goods, and we throw them away. And when we do the final stage, we sort of waste all the energy and all the effort that has been put into producing the goods and also delivering them to us. And we find ourselves with a huge amount of waste, which is continuously growing. We find ourselves with CO2 emissions, which are associated with the linear system at each stage of production, and lots of other negative economic and environmental consequences. So what do we do to avoid the negativity caused by this ineffective system? We often get to hear about recycling as the key to resolving the issues created by the linear economy. So through properly recycling, properly sorting, and then reusing the materials, we can revitalize the system and prolong the life cycle of the materials. But is recycling sufficient? First of all, I would like to stress that two types of recycling exist: upcycling and downcycling. Upcycling pertains to recycling through which we receive materials of the same quality or of even better quality, which means that we are not losing the value of the materials and they can be used pretty much for the same purposes. Downcycling is the opposite process. It pertains to a recycling process where the material loses some of its value and cannot be used for the same purpose anymore. Plastic is a bright and nice example. After recycling, its quality goes down quite significantly, while the price of recycled plastic is rather quite a bit higher than for virgin plastic. The next issue is that lots of materials are not recyclable at all, or their recycling might be theoretically possible, but economically inexpedient, because recycling is a time-consuming and energy-consuming process, whereas the materials are quite low cost. Such widely used materials as plastic, once more using it as an example, it is quite cheap to produce in virgin form, but then recycling it is quite expensive. Let's consider recycling using the example of aluminium. Aluminium is seen as one of the best materials for recycling. It does not lose its quality after multiple cycles of recycling, and recycling it saves a huge amount of energy and water. For example, by recycling a single aluminium can, you are saving an amount of energy that could power your TV for 3 hours. But every time we recycle aluminium, we lose about 10% of the material forever. And a single can has about a 3-month life cycle before it ends up in recycling. So in 4 years, you will lose it completely. So recycling is a nice idea, but in the linear system, it only slows down the loss of valuable materials. Recycling occurs at the end of the product's life cycle, after it has been disposed of by the consumer. And so it focuses on battling the consequences of our system and not the underlying reason for why it is ineffective. If we are focused on the end of the life cycle in the linear economy with recycling, then the circular economy is focused on the entire life cycle. The most important thing in the circular economy is preventing the generation of waste and pollution. We are focusing on the original cause and on the system as a whole, not on a specific step. In a properly built circular economy, the recycling stage is the least desirable. It is the solution used when all of the more high priority options have been used. The most simple definition that I can offer to you, which you see on the screen right now, is that the circular economy is an economic model which meets the needs of people without violating the natural limits of our planet. I added 2 key schemes on this slide characterizing the concept of circular economy. They are called the butterfly and the donut. And if this is the main takeaway you get from my presentation, you will be able to trace back as to what was being discussed. If you Google these 2 concepts, you will understand you will be able to learn more. So this is the butterfly diagram. This was developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. What you see on the left is the wing that pertains to the circular flow of biological materials, for example, food. And then on the right, the cycle for technologically developed materials, such as a washing machine. And the main idea of this diagram is continuous circularity. All the materials end up back in the system and are not shipped to a waste disposal site or whatever. So the waste of one enterprise can be used by another company, and this is all powered by renewable energy. The other diagram is the donut, which is the result of Cato Wurst working and thinking about circular economy. This is what this diagram tells you. There are two limits of the circle which should not be crossed to ensure a proper life for people on the planet. The top is the environmental ceiling, and then the bottom is the social basis. The social basis focuses on ensuring that people have their key needs met, such as healthcare, proper living condition, etc. And then the environmental ceiling means that focuses on not crossing the limits of the systems, ensuring the planet's sustainability. And the donut is the space that is between these two limits. This is the safe space, the sustainable space in which humanity can properly develop. And then the circular economy provides us with a model allowing to achieve this vision. Circular economy takes a lot of inspiration from nature, similarly to artists and musicians. Just in the same way, economists, politicians, people who are talking about the circular economy are being inspired by nature, because nature is a zero waste system with harmonious coexistence. I want to focus now on the three key principles of circular economy using a tree as an example. So the tree does not generate any waste. It blossoms. The blossom then attracts, say, bees. The blossom then falls down and is turned into nurturing resources for other systems. Then the tree also provides fruit, which feeds other animals, humans, etc. So everything that the tree produces is of huge value to other elements that surround it. The principle of recreation could also be called the principle of generosity. The tree in itself, in isolation, is not that productive, but its interaction with its surroundings, with its environment, supports the recovery of all of these systems, which also support the recovery of the tree itself. So when we talk about recovery, we're not talking about reducing negative impacts. We are thinking about rethinking. We're talking about rethinking, building a system, building a business that will be able to nurture the systems around it, ensuring their blossoming and its own blossoming. So why do we need circular economy? What are the key drivers of change? I have enumerated 5 of them here, but you could think of some more, of course. The first driver is economic losses and cost risks. Even if you are recycling a significant amount of resources, even in Europe, still this recovery and recuperation only covers for about 5% of the original cost of the raw materials. A lot of materials are lost. A lot of materials are not used. A car, for example, is parked and unused for 92% of time. 30% of food is lost before it makes to a shop, for example, and an average office before the pandemic, of course, was only used for about 30 or 50% of its capacity. And you can imagine what the figures are right now. We also hear a lot about environmental degradation, climate change, the loss of biological diversity, pollution of soil and the oceans. And cities are contributing a lot to this. By 2050, we expect that we will have 2.5 billion more people living in cities who will be consuming resources and who will be pushing the environment towards degradation. The critical condition of the environment has taken us to looking for more sustainable solutions and situations. And we are being pushed, so to speak, towards the circular economy. And we see this in the active regulatory change that is taking place both in the West and in the East. Perhaps most interestingly is to mention the decision of the European Commission, which approved an action plan to move towards the circular economy, which is one of the key building blocks for the EU Green Deal. Talking about new technologies, they help coming up with new solutions quicker, more efficiently, and they might be able to address the challenges that we are facing now. I also wanted to share this map with you, which shows the high risk of natural disasters resulting from climate change around the world. So what it shows you is the following. Scientists have identified climatic changes over the last 10 years, which result from human activities. The red dots that you see here, the red markers, represent represents locations where the research was undertaken and where a direct causal link has been established between climate change and human activity. The locations which are not marked don't stand for places where this connection does not exist. It's just that the research has not been undertaken there yet. But as Peter Drucker, one of the founding fathers of modern management, said, each social and global issue of our time is a business opportunity, and it is so. So the circular economy in the Europe alone allows for about $2 trillion worth of opportunities by 2050. The linear economy represents 3 times less the economic potential, and this data comes from McKinsey and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Right. So where do you take inspiration and how do you use the circular economy opportunities? A lot of the opportunities and innovations for many businesses are represented by each of the strategies represented here, and I will talk about them now briefly. So these strategies are now represented here in terms of their prioritization. The ones that are at the bottom are closer to linear economy. The ones at the top are about circular economy proper. So the ReThink strategy, which you absolutely correctly prioritized as number 1, is the most circular approach, whereas recycling and energy recovery are some of the least attractive and least circular economy strategies. So here they are broken down into 3 main blocks, and we will start the one with the bottom. It represents the useful application of materials. It focuses on tackling the consequences of the linear production system. So again, we're focused on the end of the life cycle. We're managing waste, which could have ended up at a waste disposal site, but we are avoiding that. So the recycle and recover strategies have a limited impact on production and consumption. Despite this, most regulation change is focused currently on these 2 bottom strategies. Then the next block is about prolonging the life cycle of the goods or their elements. So strategies from R3 to R7 are, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. They help keep the produced goods in use for as long as possible and prolong their value in time. And then, and so we can look at them each in detail. Reuse is about ensuring the use of the material by another consumer. For example, this is highly relevant for packaging in B2B and B2C contexts. And we will talk about a little later about reusing glass bottles, for example. Then strategy R4 is about repair. So restoring the item and allowing it to serve for a little longer. Then there's refurbish, R5, which is about improving the goods in some way, one way or another. Then R6, remanufacture. This is about using elements from a product that's been thrown away in a product used for the same purpose. Say your washing machine might contain useful and reusable elements, and so the manufacturer may choose to somehow take it back from you and use some of these elements to craft a new washing machine. And then a strategy RE7 is about repurposing. It shares a lot of similarities with remanufacturing, but the difference is that the goods produced are going to have a different purpose. For example, your washing machine may serve to complete a kettle. And then we move on to the top block of strategies, which is about the smart use and manufacturing of the product. So strategy R0 at the very top is called ReThink. It's about reconsidering the manufacturing process, the conceptualization of ideas, the dynamics, the processes, the concepts, the use and the post-use of the product. So this orients you towards thinking whether there is a completely different approach to doing what you're doing now. Then there's the R1 strategy, which is called refuse, where you have to consider whether you need to use this product at all and whether you could use something else for the same purpose. So we can often see this now in the beverage industry, where people are able to arrive at a specific location and have their own bottles, for example, filled with whatever they're looking for. The second strategy, R2, is called reduce. So it's pretty self-explanatory. It's about reducing the amount of materials used to manufacture the goods. It's about focusing on the processes and ensuring their efficiency. Circular strategies are reflected in circular business models. The key five circular business models are identified, and they are being put to use quite actively around the world. These include sharing platforms, a product as a service, prolonging the life cycle of a product, resource recovery, and circular resources. And I've also included some of the strategies here that represent each of the business models. Now I will focus on each of them by providing an example that fits each. I will be talking about companies who have been quite successful. We'll start with sharing platforms. The name speaks for itself. The platform means that consumer goods will be used more intensively, especially for consumer goods that are usually not used particularly intensively. As I mentioned before, 92% of the time, a car is usually standing idle somewhere, which obviously opens up the space for it being shared. So the Fat Llama company, represented here, has established a platform allowing to rent out various household items to other users. For example, household tools or photo cameras, which are not used particularly often, can be shared with others. The owner obviously receives additional income, so the equipment is used. The other users of the platform gain access to equipment that is much cheaper than buying it or renting it out elsewhere. And the manufacturers can know that their goods will be used for a lot longer. The next model is called product as a service. So a specific item is combined with service provision. For example, Hewlett-Packard provides subscriptions for refilling your printer cartridges. The system identifies when you are nearing the point where your ink is about to run out, and you will receive a new cartridge over the mail. You can use the letter that you received your new cartridges in to put the old cartridges in and send them back to the company. And this increases efficiency both for the users and for the company, and the cartridges are not thrown away and they continue serving others. Now, product life extension, again, pretty self-explanatory. This model is incredibly important for the circular economy because the goods used this way stay in the economy for longer, and thus the need for new virgin resources is reduced. Heineken, for example, France, this new bottle, which becomes better looking as it is used. Each bottle also have its own unique story that the consumer might view in a special app. So the longer the bottle travels, the cooler it becomes. the CO2 footprint is reduced by some 74%, according to the company itself. Right, the next model is resource recovery. So materials are manufactured using waste. For example, Ksenia Schneider, the Ukrainian fashion company, takes in jeans that are not worn anymore and produces a new pair of jeans. A single virgin pair of jeans, so to speak, requires lots of pesticides and lots of resources to be produced. There's also a huge carbon footprint associated with their transportation, whereas this business model uses resources that are readily available and do not require a huge amount of a huge carbon footprint. And then finally, the circular supplies model foresees that traditional models are replaced with biologically generated materials, materials that are renewable. For example, the Notville company came up with an edible and biodegradable alternative to plastic packaging that can be used for various goods and is usually not recycled. So this revolutionary packaging is produced of algae. It decomposes in several weeks, and it is a fantastic alternative to plastic. So now we have discussed about the business models. Now it's time to move on to designing products and services for the circular economy. We will just briefly touch on some of the main principles for designing and what do we mean even when we're talking about designing. Designing in the circular economy is the process of developing what something will look like from scratch. Why this is important? This is important because many goods surrounding us have been created by someone else. At the designing stage, you are able to impact about 80% of how this, of the carbon footprint and of the general environmental impact that a piece of production an item will have. And once you make those decisions, they are set in stone, so to speak, and reducing the impact can be very difficult. So when designing something for the circular economy, you need to use the zoom in and the zoom out principles. What we mean by this is the following. First, we move towards the scale of the consumer. We assume their position and start designing our product. But we need to balance this with also the systematic scale, so to speak. So we need to consider how our solution fits into the existing systems, whether it creates additional pressure on resources, whether it introduces renewable energy, etc., whether it is positive or negative. So this is the main principle that you need to consider when designing something for the circular economy. So what do you start with if you're designing something circular, if you want to implement a more circular approach and a more circular business model? You can start by answering the following questions, actually. The first question is, what are the materials used for our products now? Are we using biological or man-made materials? How are these materials combined? Where do they end up? Is there an issue with their toxicity and pollution? And are there better alternatives to these materials or their combinations? By answering these questions, you will be in a position to determine how your company should be moving forward. Right. So we've talked about what you should start with. I would also now like to touch on what you should avoid. You know, there is this temptation to use the circular economy as a bit of a marketing strategy rather than a proper change strategy for your company. And this is referred to as greenwashing. Greenwashing is deceiving your customer as to your environmental intentions and the environmental friendliness of your product to improve your reputation, increase sales, and increase income. So as you can see on the picture, we repaint our production, we change our color, and we don't change anything fundamentally. And doing this may take the green economy, the circular economy, to just becoming a buzzword, a hype word. People will not trust this concept. So let's be responsible, because it's our actions that determine